Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon to our Homes, Our Votes, Voter Registration and Mobilization for Low-Income Voters webinar. And we're very fortunate this afternoon to have some great panelists with us who can share their perspective on voter registration and mobilization for low-income voters. We are recording this webinar, so after we are done, we'll be able to save a recording of it and get it to those of you who were on the webinar. We'll be able to share the PowerPoint slides, and also you'll then be able to share what is recorded with those you know who are interested in the topic but weren't able to join us for the webinar. And just so you know, there on your control panel, when you logged on to the webinar, there is an area where you can ask questions. So we are certainly going to open up the webinar to questions at the end and answer any questions that anyone might have about voter registration. So our presenters today will be Tober Burritt, who is a housing advocacy organizer with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, Jesse Burns, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, and Linda Flores Tober, who's the Executive Director of the Elizabeth Coalition to House the Homeless. We're going to be giving and sharing a variety of information on the webinar today, but just some key dates to keep in mind as we talk about the different aspects of voter registration and mobilization of low-income voters is that the deadline to register to vote in New Jersey in the general election coming up is Tuesday, October 16th. The midterm election will be on Tuesday, November 6th. So you need to register by October 16th to vote in the November 6th election. I'm now going to turn over the presentation to Tori, and she's going to share with us the information from the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign, which is spearheaded by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Tori?
Great, thanks, Kate. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So like Kate said, my name's Tori, and I'm the housing advocacy organizer at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, we're a national nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that the lowest income households have access to safe, decent, and affordable homes and accessible homes. And today I'm going to talk to you about our voter engagement efforts and how your organizations and communities can get renters out to vote. Next slide. So Our Homes, Our Votes is our effort at NLIHC to increase voter registration and turnout among low-income folks and their advocates and allies. And we plan to do this work through education, voter registration, and mobilization. Next slide. So why are we doing this work? Because policymakers care most about voters. So whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or really some other party, it's not constituents that drive their decisions, but it's really voting constituents. Until low-income renters vote at equal to or greater numbers than high-income homeowners, low-income rental housing issues just won't be a top priority for policymakers. So it's really that simple. And at NLIHC, our members and our partners are really in a unique position to amplify the voices and help low-income renters register and get out to vote. Basically, when low-income renters lack a strong presence at the polls, we have unfavorable policy decisions. But when low-income voters become a powerful voting bloc, that's when really big change is possible. Next slide. So this is what we're up against. This is what the difference looks like between renters and homeowners and who is voting. On this table here, you can see in 2016 that about 67% of homeowners voted compared to less than half of renters. Next slide. So when you do it by income, when you look at the discrepancies by income, the discrepancies are even starker. So in that same year, in 2016, households with incomes over $100,000, nearly 3/4 of those folks voted, and less than 40% of very low or extremely low income households voted. So this is what we're up against. Changing this equation is essential. It's just really foundational to us achieving our goals of ending homelessness and housing poverty. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about voter suppression. Voter suppression is an issue that the people we advocate for are facing more frequently. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about it and why it's important to be aware of this issue. So generally, voter suppression refers to policies and actions aimed at creating barriers for people to participate in elections. And often this is done with the goal of influencing both the outcomes of elections and policy in the long run. So next slide. So what do voter suppression activities look like? So one of the most infamous examples is the voter ID law, which requires voters to get specific identification that is often difficult and time-consuming to obtain. There's also voter caging, which seeks to challenge a voter's eligibility to vote and ultimately purges voters based on undeliverable mail. Caging has most recently been observed in North Carolina during the 2016 elections, where 3 counties were found guilty of systematically purging between 3,500 and 4,000 voters from registration rolls. And actually, Ohio has had the same problems as well. Since 2011, 11 states, including North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Nebraska, have reduced their early voting periods. Many southern states, such as Texas, Arizona, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama, have closed at least 868 polling places since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down portions of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. And finally, there are misinformation campaigns which target specific communities in regards to voting. A recent example includes an effort in Virginia during the 2017 gubernatorial election, in which a Twitter account tweeted graphics instructing voters how to vote by text using their phone. So ultimately, the reason why we should be most concerned with these efforts is the large overlap between the groups of people these programs are designed to disenfranchise and people who are likely to be lower income people and renters. Next slide. So now I'm just going to go over briefly some key consideration when it comes to registering voters, educating them, and getting them out to vote. Next slide. So first, though, I want to clear up a major myth that some folks have, which is 501c3s can participate in voter engagement work, and they should. 501c3s can register voters, they can educate voters and candidates, and they can encourage voters to get out and vote. They can't make endorsements of candidates, they can't donate resources or staff time to a candidate, and employees' partisan activities have to be done on their own time. Next slide. So basically what we're saying is, yes, you can do this kind of work and you should do this kind of work. It's very important. Next slide.
Hold on 1 second. We're just waiting for it to catch up. I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Are you able, we'll catch up with you, Tori. Are you able to?
Yeah, sure. Yep, I can keep moving on.
Okay.
Sure. So now I'm briefly going to just talk a little bit about voter registration. So it's still very possible for y'all to register folks to vote. Voter registration ends October 16th. So we're about a month away. It ends October 16th in New Jersey. So you still have about a month to register people. So before you engage in voter engagement efforts, it's really important to know what voter registration laws are, such as if you can register online, when the deadline is, etc. So Nonprofit Vote has great information about registration laws via the resource Voting in Your State. Nonprofit Vote breaks down where the offices are located, gives people the option to check their registration and they have info about registering on election day itself. So when conducting a registration drive, it's important to train staff and volunteers on the legal consideration of registration, There are some communities where they might have rules about when and how to fill out registration forms. So it's really essential that you're familiar with all of that before you engage in that effort. So after people are informed about the rules, make sure you have the proper resources like enough registration forms, pledge cards to remind people to vote, sample ballots, and fact sheets on issues impacted by the election. Day-to-day is the best way to think of registration. If you run a service center or if you're housing a provider, you should be putting registration forms everywhere. If you have a mailing list, consider mailing registration forms or instructions for registering. Beyond voter registration in your day-to-day work, you can plan specific events like voter registration parties or a Meet the Candidates event when people learn about housing issues and fill out forms to register. It's important to keep records. Knowing who the voters are once you registered them is how you will turn them out. Knowing how to keep in touch with the voters is important. Records also show that your efforts are having success and that you're building a large base of voters that candidates should care about. So just to draw your attention, so the National Voter Registration Day is on September 25th, and this is a national day of coordinated volunteer events around getting folks out to register to vote. So for people who want to volunteer on voter registration, they can go to the website, select find an event, put in their zip code, and then they know where to show up and get trained on voter registration. For any events you have on this date can be populated on the website, and it can help connect you to volunteers that can help out. So today we're going to focus on, now I'm going to turn it over and start talking about education components and how to educate voters. So you can educate clients on their rights and how to vote, and educate them on the various issues. So clients should be informed of where their polling place is, what documentation they will need to have with them in order to vote, in their rights if election officials attempt to prevent them from voting. Arranging for local election officials to demonstrate how voting machine works can be helpful in easing fears about voting for the first time. And the National Coalition for the Homeless, You Don't Need a Home to Vote Voting Rights campaign seeks to protect and promote the right of homeless people to vote. It offers materials on all aspects of a voter engagement campaign, including specific state-by-state information on the legal issues affecting the rights of people experiencing homelessness to vote. And you can find more information about this campaign at www.nationalhomeless.org/campaigns/voting. In terms of educating renters on the issues, nonprofits can provide opportunities for people to hear the direct views of candidates. Distribution of candidate questionnaires, hosting debate watch parties, or holding candidate forums are examples of such opportunities. It can often be very powerful when candidates are asked about housing issues or homelessness in public forums or town hall meetings. So just registering voters isn't enough. It's been consistently shown that voters are much more likely to go to the polls if they're contacted on several occasions and reminded to vote by someone they really trust. Considerable attention should be made to mobilizing the people you have registered. So you should aim for at least 3 contacts with each registered voter spread out, and make sure to coordinate rides for voters so that they can get to the polls. Offering a ride is not offering an illegal incentive to vote. Use your database of registered voters to make your contacts. And then over the course of your contacts, you should make sure that the voter commits to voting, knows when election day is, and knows where her polling place is. Ideally, these contacts should be in person through a knock at the door, but you can do it through emails, calls, and even postcards. And later on in this webinar, you'll hear how you can mobilize voters through your daily interactions with them. And so the last piece of voter engagement is election day. There are several things you can do the day of to make sure people are able to vote and keep voting. So the first thing really is visibility. Reminding people to vote and that election day is in fact today is key. It's good to put signs up in your buildings and in the community and to have volunteers hand out flyers. But make sure if you use volunteers that they have the right information about where the polling locations are. So you made people aware it's election day, but many people might need help getting to the polls or in some cases, they might need encouragement to get to the polls. It's definitely and totally legal for your organization to conduct ride sharing or offer rides to the polls. And you can request that volunteers in your network offer to give rides in their own vehicles on election day. To figure out who needs rides, you can post a sign-up list in your building, as well as offer rides when you call folks to remind them to go out and vote. Coordinating ride sharing or even walks to the polls can be very effective because it provides a social reinforcement for voting. You may want floor captains for people who can go door to door and let people know that they're going to the polls and they should come with them. Voters need to be prepared for common voter suppression practices, like I mentioned up front, but also such as ballot challenges, voter ID laws, and voter election day misinformation. There have been numerous occasions where we've seen campaigns deliberately publicize the wrong election day in order to frustrate and stifle low-income communities from turning out. There's also provisional ballots. So those are for when the voter arrives at a polling location and their legitimacy as being properly registered or having proper identification is being challenged. Everyone has a right to fill out a provisional ballot. It's often not counted in the initial count, but in the case of a recount or an extremely close election, provisional ballots will be examined. Local election officials will review them and consider whether the provisional ballots are legitimate. No one should ever, ever, ever leave a polling place without voting. If it's not through a traditional ballot, then it should be through a provisional ballot. Voters should also know that when they get to the polls, they need to stay in line. Often, people will show up to a polling location at the end of election day with 5 minutes left, and there's a very long line. By law, any person that is in line by the time a location closes has the right to vote. They can stay in line until they get the chance to get to vote. Finally, your state has voter protection attorneys who respond immediately on election day to things that polling location workers are doing to deny people the right to vote. Make sure you know who your attorneys are in your state so they can respond. Poll watching is an essential aspect of what's called knock and drag. A knock and drag is you have a list of people you would like to see voting. If you have a fairly small number of polling locations in which your community will be coming out to on election day, you can have a presence at the polls and cross off the names of people when they show up. You can do this continuously or periodically. This allows you to have a sophisticated phone banking and door-to-door operation on election day. You won't be wasting time calling people who already voted, and you're using your time efficiently. Poll watching also enables you to know who is left that needs to vote. You can go to their door, knock on their door, and tell them you can give them a ride. It requires having good lists, voter lists at polling locations, a master list at your office, and a list of people out in the field who are knocking on doors. All those lists need to match. So what's left? The party. It's important to reinforce that voting and democracy can be fun and is something people should look forward to. Put together an event in which you celebrate a successful voter engagement effort and you thank your volunteers. This could lay the groundwork for future voter engagement efforts too. But here's a big point around celebrations. You can never provide incentives for people to vote. So for example, saying, come in with the I voted sticker and you can get a free pizza, you can't do that. If we give incentives to people who vote, there are certain interests that could make possible versus others, and low-income folks would be at a disadvantage. So what you can provide is a ride to the polls, food for people waiting in line at the polls, stamps for registration forms, etc. But your party is for everybody, whether they voted or not. And so that's most of the information that I'm covering today. Before I wrap up, I just want to mention a few cool resources we have at NLIHC related to voter engagement. We've developed both a voter engagement guide and an engagement plan. The guide describes why we feel that nonprofits are most suited to engaging with low-income voters and advocates, and the plan gives a checklist of considerations that nonprofits can use when developing their own engagement strategy. So I would highly recommend you can check those out, and you can check them out at our new voter engagement website, www.ourhomes-ourvotes.org. It's a one-stop shop for information and resources on expanding registration and turnout of low-income renters and allies in the electoral process. We have infographics, images that you can use in your materials, articles, and updates on efforts across the country, and webinar recordings on more in-depth discussions on pieces of voter engagement that I talked about today. Again, the address is www.ourhomes-ourvotes.org. And we're able to provide you these resources in part because of the contributions of our members that help us sustain the work that we do. It's membership month this month in September, so we're doing outreach on becoming a member. To find out more, go to www.nlihc.org/membership. That's it for my slides and my content. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Tori. In a minute, we're going to turn it over to Jesse Burns from the League of Women Voters in New Jersey. And again, I wanted to apologize. We have the full PowerPoint presentation that we will share with everyone who is on this webinar after the webinar, but we're just having some technical difficulties in showing it right now live while we're hearing from our presenters. So Jesse, I will turn the mic over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jessie Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. You just heard a lot of great information about mobilization and engagement, and you're going to hear more about that later on in the webinar. So what I'm really going to focus on is informing you about the rules around voting in New Jersey specifically. So just some kind of basic things. Who can register to vote? In New Jersey, you have to be a United States citizen. You have to reside at your present address for at least 30 days. In the case of people that might not have a permanent address, they're going to use an address where they're most often. It could be a shelter or it could be a park. You cannot currently be serving a sentence for probation, be serving a sentence, be on probation or on parole because of a felony conviction. And the last thing is kind of a recent change that you have to be at least 17 years old now to register. So all 17-year-olds can register in New Jersey, but they can't vote until they're 18. Previously, you couldn't register to vote unless you were going to be 18 by the next election, but they simplified that. You can register to vote in person or by mail. What the majority of people in this webinar are going to be doing is using voter registration forms and doing in-person voter registration. You have to re-register to vote if you change your name or you've changed your address. And you should also re-register if you are no longer serving a sentence or are on parole or probation for a criminal conviction, a felony criminal conviction. Just want to go over the dates again for you all. General Election Day is November 6th. The voter registration deadline is October 16th. The vote by mail application deadline by mail is October 30th, 2018. The county clerk must receive the application through the mail by that date. The vote by mail application deadline in person is 3 p.m. November 5th, the day before election. So people can actually show up in person up till 3 p.m. the day before and register, apply for a vote by mail ballot right there in person at their county clerk's office. In New Jersey, anybody can use a vote by mail ballot. They're previously called absentee ballots. You don't need to provide a reason or excuse.
And sorry to interrupt, Jesse, I think we have the PowerPoint back up, so I think we're caught up. So I can advance the slides now.
Okay, great.
I just grabbed mail, so I'll move on now. Vote by mail.
Yeah, so there have been some. No, this is perfect. The slides are on. There have been some changes really recently to the vote by mail system in New Jersey. August 10th, Governor Murphy signed a bill that made these changes that went into effect immediately, and they're impacting this election. So right now, on vote by mail applications, voters can apply for either all future elections or for any single election. previously they could apply for future general elections, single elections, or all elections within a calendar year. So they're simplifying the options to try to make it easier for voters with disabilities or people that, like to do the vote by mail system completely, to be able to apply once and always receive a vote by mail ballot unless they indicate otherwise in writing to their county clerk. Next slide. Party affiliation in New Jersey. When people are registering to vote, they do not have to declare a party affiliation. There's no requirement to do so. It really only matters in a primary election. New Jersey is a closed primary state, meaning you have to be a member of either the Democratic or Republican parties in order to vote in their primary elections. Unaffiliated voters can declare at the polls on primary election day. So if you're registering somebody to vote and they don't want to declare a party affiliation on their registration form, just let them know that if they do want to participate in a primary election, then they can declare right there at the polls on primary election day if that's something they want to do in the future. Next slide. And to change your party affiliation, you use the party affiliation declaration form so people can change their party affiliations at any time. There are deadlines leading up to primary elections about how far in advance you can change your party affiliation, but that doesn't really apply for the November general election. Next slide. So the ID issue. New Jersey does not require ID for people to vote. It's only for a very small percentage of people, and it's going to be the people that either they did not provide the identification numbers necessary on the voter registration form, or the information that they provided could not be verified. So when voters register to vote, it asks them for either their driver's license or non-driver ID number, or their social security number. If you cannot provide either of those on your form, then you're going to be asked to provide some kind of ID the first time you show up to vote. So it's a very small percentage of people that actually need to show ID at the polls. If poll workers are asking for ID at the polls, that's something that we should be notified of, that the state should be notified of, to make sure that the poll workers at that polling place stop. Next slide. So I kind of went through a lot of information pretty quickly, but the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, we're here to assist at all questions for anybody that are running voter registration drives. We're able to help you with your voter registration drives or your voter registration practices, provide any guidance that you need. We can answer any of the questions about voter suppression and voting rights, give you information about upcoming elections, and then at vote411.org, that is where we ask all candidates running for office a series of kind of really open public policy questions. They respond to them, and people can find out more about their candidates running for office. A couple of other quick things. Polling locations, you can find polling locations at our website, lwvnj.org. There's a link that you put in an address and the polling locations come up. If you encounter any problems on election day itself or any problems with election officials leading up to election day, if you call us at 1-800-792-VOTE-8683, we'll work directly with the state and the counties to make sure that those problems stop. There was some discussion before about poll watching. New Jersey has pretty interesting and different poll observing rules, and I don't have them in the slides, but I do want to mention. So you cannot, we used to have a pretty robust poll watching program in New Jersey, us, the ACLU, a bunch of kind of other voting rights organizations. but they made a rule that you have to be outside of the 100-foot electioneering zone for everybody. So that includes groups like ours that are trying to do voting rights things. The only people that are really allowed within the polls themselves are challengers, party challengers. So they have the voting list to do the outreach. So I'm not saying that it's impossible to do poll watching in New Jersey. It's just a little bit more difficult. You have to be outside of the 100 feet, and you're going to have to get the voters to kind of come to you to check their names off the list. So that just keep that in mind. Next slide. Okay, and this is just our hotline number again. We run that hotline. It's available year-round during business hours, but we also run it from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. while the polls are open on election day. And then, like I said, we record all the problems that are happening, anything that people are seeing out in the field, and then we work directly with the state and the counties to get them resolved really, really quickly. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jessie. And as I said, we will all be available at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that may come up from those of you who are on the call. I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Linda from the Coalition for the Homeless and Elizabeth, Linda Flores Tober, who's going to talk a little bit about I think from her perspective of working at an agency that is directly serving clients, specifically low-income clients, why it's so important to let those who we are working with, low-income voters, know that their vote matters and every vote counts. Linda?
Oh, hi, and good afternoon, everyone. Calling, I wanted to talk a little bit. We are a small agency with a small staff, and so we try to do it in the most practical way available to us. So, one of our part of our mission is to empower the homeless and near homeless to become a thriving part of our community. And the one way we can do that is to encourage people to vote. But very often people feel, especially those who are low income and homeless, is that their vote doesn't count. So what we do is we attach the voter registration to our intake screening sheet. And so every person's asked if they are registered, if they do vote, and then it gives us the opportunity to kind of hear them out and what they have to say and then respond to it so that we can either encourage them to register, and then we even pay for the stamp, or if they are registered, to help them find out where they can vote when election day comes, and to encourage them to vote. We also are part of our sister agency, which is St. Joseph's, and so they have hundreds of people who come in every day to pick up sandwiches and clothes and food. And as you know, at this time of year, we start to put tables up and table people and talk to them about the importance of voting and encouraging people to register. That is probably the very most that we can do. Now that we have students, we might start going around to the housing complexes and encouraging those folks also to vote or to register to vote. But again, with a limited staff, we can't do everything that's on the list, but we try to do as much as we can. And of course, as the election day comes close, we do remind people with flyers and with posters, and on the day of election, remind them to vote as they come in our office. And that's everything in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you, Linda. For those of you who were with us when we went to Washington, D.C. for the congressional reception this summer, we had over 300 people from New Jersey down sharing with our elected officials why it's so important not to make cuts to housing, and reminding them that opportunity starts at home for all of us. And I think it was, very impactful for the elected officials, our U.S. senators and our members of the U.S. House delegation who were there, to see how many individuals who were there, and also that many, if not most of all the attendees at the reception were wearing a little ribbon on their name tag reminding their elected officials that they're a voter. And so I think, Linda's perspective is very important to have, because, our votes do matter, no matter what your income is or where you live, or, whether or not you have a home. Votes are important, and I think that's just an important message to just keep reminding all of us and those that you work with. So at this point, I want to open it up if there are any questions. There is, if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a box where folks can type in questions. So if you have questions for our experts, now's the time to ask us, and we can moderate those and get those answered. So I'll give everyone a minute or two to type in any questions they might have. And certainly while we're waiting for that, if you think of questions after we're done, or you're sharing the slides or the audio recording of the webinar with your colleagues, I'm going to advance to the next slide, which has the contact information, has my contact information at Monarch Housing, and I can certainly put you in touch with our presenters and get back to you with any questions that I might not be able to answer, but that Tori or Jesse or Linda might be able to answer. So at this time, it looks like there are not any questions, so we are going to end the webinar. But again, I just wanted to thank our presenters, Tori, Jesse, and Linda, for their thoughtful presentations and for sharing their expertise with us, and just remind folks that we're here for you to be a resource as we head towards the deadline, October 16th, to register to vote, and then after that, as we begin to mobilize folks to get out and vote on November 6th. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.